for my recording? Nice. Good. Well, I just sort of spoiled my own contextualization, unless you want to do some contextualization for me about Germany and how Germany leads up to 1919 to 1933 Weimar Germany. What kind of contextualization would you throw at me if you were doing a Germany contextualization? How far back would you go? Did you talk about Martin Luther and the Reformation? Would you talk about Gutenberg and the printing press? Did you talk about the 30 Years' War? Would you talk about the 1848 revolution? Attempts at creating a united Germany? Oh, somewhat. Would you talk about Bismarck, 1870, 71? Wars of German unification? Wacky Wilhelm II? World War I? All of that stuff can kind of build up to where we're at with the Weimar Republic. A democratic state that doesn't last very long, sadly, 1919 to 1933. It's called the Weimar Republic because they left Berlin for a while. The politicians left Berlin and went to a little provincial town called Weimar in order to write a constitution and create, this democratic state. I'm excited about the democratic Weimar state. Yellow is Prussia. Everything else is everything else. Do you notice anything about the new German state?
It's tiny.
It's tiny. It's tinier than it was. It lost some stuff. But do you get how half of it is Prussia? And Prussia's kind of a different sort of state. What do we know about Prussia historically? It's militaristic. And so if half of your state is, made up of a former military power, it's going to probably that's going to be part and parcel of what the Germans have going on. Well, there is this super moderate revolution that happens in November of 1918. November 1917, you had a Bolshevik revolution happening in Russia, followed by a civil war, and eventually you get a Soviet Union. You get this revolution, quote-unquote revolution in Germany. It seems like deja vu. It seems like the people who actually call for the new republic, the people who open up a window, stand on a balcony and say, the republic is declared, are social democrats. In other words, if you believe what they say they believe in, they're Marxists. There is, at the end of the war, then, no invasion of Germany. You know how that whole thing worked out, where the German soldiers quit fighting, and then the Allies sort of pushed them back a little bit. But generally, there's just no invasion of Germany. The Germans go and they sign the Treaty of Versailles and don't get invaded. The two parties that are the two largest parties in the Reichstag, in the parliament, are the Social Democratic, quote unquote Marxists, and also the Center Party, the Catholic Center Party. Those are the very same groups of people who Bismarck thought were suspiciously not nationalistic enough. And here they are benefiting from the loss of the Germans in World War I. Very suspicious. Nice things, though, that happen. You and I like these things. Democratic reforms, a democratic republic, people vote, and the majority party forms a cabinet, and they have a chancellor. It's like the British system in a weird way. Women get to vote. I like that a lot. I hope you do too. There are lots of different kinds of political parties. We'll talk about some of them today. There is a chancellor, a kind of prime minister type person who actually, runs the country. There's a president who sort of seems like a king, sort of stays out of stuff for the most part. And then if they need him for some reason, like in emergency times, he can, come in and swoop in and fix things. There's a bicameral legislature, the People's House, the lower house is the Reichstag, and it's really democratic. It's really pretty cool. However, just because you declare a republic doesn't mean all those old people with their old ideas, the old elites, doesn't mean that they go away. In fact, I've got an image for you. This is called Pillars of Society, and this is by George Gross, who is a German artist. Well, after this, we could probably figure out George Gross's politics. But Pillars of Society, the people who are running German society, according to George Gross. And I don't know if you can figure out who these people are supposed to represent by what they have, but let's try. It'll be fun. You at home can play along too. You could say, well, the guy with the blah, blah, blah is probably a something, something.
Well, it looks like there might be some soldiers in the back.
Yeah, there's a soldier in the back. How is he portrayed?
Well, he looks kind of mean and ugly.
He really does. So yeah, a militarist, let's say, somebody who's really into the military, probably very right wing, right? And look at what war brings you behind him. Death, destruction, burning, and so on. Good job. What else do we have?
Well, in front of the soldier, like the black cloak, sort of church guy.
Yeah, he could be a minister, a preacher, right? Kind of looks like that. He kind of looks like he's preaching too. Think about during the war, or really oftentimes, how clergy people are at a right wing and how clergy people might support the state.
They're kind of using either position.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. He looks like he's preaching for this stuff, this right-wing stuff. I think we figured out this is a right-wing Pillars of Society. How about this guy who's got the feather thing in his hand, and he's got whatever this is here. He's got his papers. Do you get what that person is? A quill and newspaper. Somebody just messed it up.
Like the media or something.
The right-wing media, that's it. Yeah, the right-wing media. And you probably like what he's wearing on his head, but it's not maybe what most people think it is. Your hint is it's not a massive teacup. So what is it? I can tell you the German word for it if you'd like. It's a Nachttopf.
Sounds angry.
All German sounds angry. My kids flee from me when I tell them that I'm fond of them. That's how angry it is. Yeah, what do we call this in English?
Helmet?
In German, it's literally a night pot. I think we call them chamber pots. It's nice that you don't know that. You all have flushing pots. That's very good. A chamber pot. It's something that you use when you because oftentimes people at this point in time have to go outside of their apartment or outside of their house in order to go to the bathroom. It's much more convenient if you just have this thing and you do your business and you go right there. What?
Swastika?
It is a swastika. Let's talk about this though for just one second. He's wearing this on his head, which shows us that he's got, you can say it, it's a little bit crude. He's got the same thing that this guy has. The guy to the right. He's got shit for brains. Right? Isn't that what he's saying? The right-wing media. Pee and poop for brains. Swastika guy. What swastika guy have? What are in his hands? Beer and
And a sword?
a sword. Thank you very much. Yeah. The Nazis at this point in time are known for drinking beer in beer halls in Munich and then trying to overthrow the government. It's kind of a fun start to the Nazis. Beer hall speeches. Their ideas sound so much better when you're slightly drunk or really drunk. So you've got the Nazi here. You can't really tell that he doesn't really have shit for brains. I think I'm allowed to say that even if I'm recording. Can you tell what's going on up here in his brains? It's hard to see. Do you know Don Quixote? Jousting at windmills? Well, it's a knight. It's a black knight on horseback jousting. These Nazis have these fantastical ideas about a completely sort of like a medieval society in a weird way. A lot of heroic, violent sort of imagery with them. Good. All right. So George Gross is clearly a fan or a hater of all this stuff. Does he like the right wing or does he hate the right wing?
Probably hate.
Yeah, he's a communist, actually. He's one of these guys on the far left. He's making fun of these right-wing pillars of society. Well, the Treaty of Versailles is not popular. The Republic at first, and the Reichstag, the people who are sitting in the parliament at first, support the Republic. Imagine being voted into the Reichstag and then being able to make law, and it's a wonderful thing. But then the Treaty of Versailles gets signed. And a lot of people they don't want to recognize that they had to sign the Treaty of Versailles. There's just no choice. What do? You're going to get invaded. You lost the war. They didn't know it was going to be so harsh. They didn't know that they have their own war debt. You know, every single country, except for the United States, has a ton of war debt over 4 years of fighting. Now the Germans, with reparations, are going to have to take on the war debt of the other countries that they fought. The Germans broke Europe, they have to pay for it, according to everybody else. So the Germans are really mad about that. And so everyone, all the different political parties, right wing, left wing, in the center, they want to revise the Treaty of Versailles. And I get to show you how far left-leaning people and how far right-leaning people revolted in the early days of the Weimar Republic. 1919, 1923, it's very symmetrical, in fact. There are two left-wing revolts and two right-wing revolts. There are two in the northern part of Germany and two in the southern part of Germany. I love symmetry. I hope you do too. In 1919, January of 1919, right as this is even before the Treaty of Versailles has been signed, that is going to take until summer 1919, basically. But in 1919, there is this thing called the Spartacist revolt. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Spartacus. Oh, good, yeah. Spartacus is a gladiator, and he leads a rebellion of slaves. Well, this is in some ways a rebellion of slaves as well. The Social Democratic Party, this alleged Marxist Democratic Party, split at the end of World War I, where the far left became communists, or the KPD, and the more moderate socialists sort of just stayed the Social Democratic Party. So the communists, the far left-leaning people who looked at the Soviet Union or what happened in Russia and said, that's what we want here in Germany, they decided in January of 1919 to rise up in Berlin and try to topple the government. The new democratic government is going to be toppled. Because communists don't believe in democracy, they believe in revolution. They believe in seizing power. They believe in the dictatorship of the proletariat. So the communists rise up in Berlin. Their leaders at this point in time are a woman named Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Not that that's particularly important. They don't last long either. Here's the crazy bit about this, or maybe it's not so crazy. Here's just what happens. The Social Democratic government, the one that declared the revolution in the first place just a few months before, decides to ask the right wing, people on the right, to help them crush the people who are rising up against them on the left. So they ask the government, this SPD, the socialist-led government, asks the army, and even worse than that, veterans of World War I, right-leaning veterans of World War I, far-right veterans of World War I, who have joined together or continue to hang out together in groups called Freikorps or Freikorps. They ask these right-wing institutions and organizations to crush the revolt, which they're happy to do. And Liebknecht and Luxemburg are they're murdered. The the right wing gets their hands on them and doesn't allow them to continue to live. They should have probably been turned over for prosecution and tried and sentenced to whatever. Nope, these guys get their hands on them. I think one of them gets beaten to death and the other one gets shot, and their bodies get dumped in nearby canals in Berlin. Here are some guys who are fighting in the Spartacist revolt. I don't know if you can tell by the photograph. Do you think they're left or do you think they're right-leaning people, and why do you think that? They got a machine gun, they have a hand grenade, and they have a rifle. What do you think happened?
I right leaning because they have like stuff to fight.
They've got real military gear, don't they? Good. Let's look at the next photo, though. These are the right-wing guys. These are the Free Corps. Now, how military are these guys? They're like 90%, right? The only thing is, they don't officially belong to the army anymore. Officially. Unofficially, holy cow. Do you know what this guy here at the top left has in his hand? What that thing is? It's a flamethrower. Wow, nice. And an armored car, and hand grenades, and trucks with machine guns on top. Let's go back to those other guys real quick. Those guys are in suits. Where did these guys, these working class men, where did they learn to use a machine gun, throw hand grenades, and fire rifles? Same place where their right-wing enemies did. What just ended? World War I, yeah. So these guys learned how to kill in World War I. The other guys learned how to kill in World War I. Now they're killing each other in the streets of Berlin in January of 1919. But it seems like the Free Corps, poor Luxembourg and Liebknecht, that's sad. It seems like the Free Corps, that seems like they are just equipped with all the stuff that the real soldiers have. These Free Corps are very much like the Italian squadristi that we'll talk about when we talk about Mussolini. They are veterans of World War I. They're ultra-conservative, ultra-right-wing nationalists who are scared to death of Bolshevism or communism. So many right-wing people are just scared to death of the threat of Bolshevism, communism, Marxism, that they're willing to kill to maintain their way of life. In addition to that, these guys had spent 1, 2, 3, 4 years in the trenches of World War I. Violence for them is just normal. They killed people. Then killing somebody is like, what, I didn't kill someone today? That's a pity. It's my hobby. And then plus, if you spend all that time in the trenches, are you really good for anything else if you're used to killing people? Like you're gonna go to work in a factory or something? So these Free Corps guys are, I guess they're either the pre-Nazis themselves, or maybe their kids will be the actual cannon fodder of the Nazis. I mean, it's going to be 20 years or so before World War I breaks out. That was the right-wing Northern German, the left-wing Northern German revolt. Here's a left-wing Southern German revolt. It's called the Bavarian Soviet Republic. Communists take over Bavaria for a very short period of time. And the same thing happens to this left-wing revolt in the South as what happened in the North. The army comes in, the Free Corps come in, and they destroy the communists. This is mostly a funny rather than scary revolt. Bavaria is the least likely place to have a communist takeover. Bavaria is the Texas of Germany. Religious, conservative, people in folk costume. You think Texas is ripe for communism? Not so much. Go back up to the north, and here comes some right-wing revolts. I guess the left-wing revolts are first, the right-wing revolts are second. And for some reason, I don't know, I've sort of surmised this. We call these rebellions or revolts putsches. I don't know why. But both the right-wing things are called putsches. The Kapp Putsch is a right-wing coup of army officers and a journalist, Dr. Wolfgang Kapp, who decided to take over Berlin. And they got all these weapons, they got all these uniforms, and so some rogue Free Corps units get out in the streets of Berlin and seize Berlin. They seize power. The social democratic politicians flee, and then they do the exact same thing that they did a year before. They say, they call up the army and say, "Could you help us out? It's happening again. There's another revolt." And the army says, "Well, wait a second. It's not the same. We were more than happy to kill left-leaning people. We don't agree with soldiers killing soldiers." They were killing soldiers before. It's just that, these are right-wing guys. And so the army refuses to act. The only thing that saves the government is the working class. The working class goes on strike and shuts down Berlin. No streetcars, no power, no telephone service. This right-wing coup has taken over a dead city. And they're like, "Oh, we can't run a dead city. Dr. Wolfgang Kapp, please," and the coup falls apart. I should warn you. I think you're about to see Hitler's knees. Just know that. Yes. I know, it's not pretty. Here's the beer hall putsch of 1923. This happens in Munich. And it is, as I say, there's this group of people who start to call themselves the Nazis, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. It's a group of anti-Semites who try to take over the Munich government in order to foment an entire revolution against the Weimar government. Well, it starts with Hitler, this guy, we'll talk much more about him later, giving a speech in a beer hall, and then everyone's kind of half drunk. He's like, "And now we're going to march to the city hall and take it over." And everyone's like, "Yeah." So they do that. They come up to the city hall. The police are there waiting for them. They shoot into the Nazis. A few Nazis die, and then the rest flee. Hitler is sentenced to prison for 4 years. That's nothing. He's a traitor. He should have been there for 40 years, or maybe even killed. But the old elites, the old judges from the imperial period, are still in power, and so they're giving right-wing revolutionaries very small sentences, and left-wing revolutionaries very harsh sentences. So Hitler spends actually 9 months in prison, writing a book, and then he's freed. Part of what was going on around this period of time, why Hitler thought they might be successful, is that there is a hyperinflation happening in 1923. This hyperinflation happened when the Germans started to drag their feet in paying the reparations, paying the British and the French for the most part. They were trying to get away with something. They don't want to pay reparations, and so they start missing the payments. They start sending less coal and fewer telephone poles and iron and things like that to the French and the British. Well, the French decide to force the Germans into paying. They essentially repossess the industrial heart of Germany. They invade the Ruhr industrial region and say, well, when the products come out of German factories, we're just going to load them up onto trains and send them to France, or send them to Belgium, or send them to Britain. Well, the German government tells the workers in the Ruhr, stop working. Don't work for the French. Don't work for the Belgians. Don't work for the British. And the workers say, we'll starve to death. And the German government says, no, you won't. We'll pay you not to work. We'll print money and pay you with that printed money. You can't do that. You can't just make money. It loses its value. There has to be something backing it. And so hyperinflation ensues. Before World War I, it was 4 Reichsmark to the dollar. At the height of the hyperinflation, it was 4 trillion Reichsmark to the dollar. Little kids were playing with bundles of cash. People were burning bundles of cash in order to stay warm. People were wallpapering inside of their houses with bundles of cash because cash was basically worthless. People were being paid twice a day. Get paid at noon because the value of that money's about to fall. You get paid, you need a wheelbarrow for your pay, and then run to the market really quickly. Buy a loaf of bread with a wheelbarrow full of cash, and then go back. It was really pretty terrible. It all gets fixed, but it ruins the middle class. It all gets fixed by a plan to borrow money from the Americans, and then pay the British and the French, and then the British and the French pay the Americans. Sort of this weird shell game called the Dawes Plan. It works out. It stabilizes a new German currency, and everything seems to be okay. I'll just keep going. By the way, everyone's the middle class because let's say you had 20,000 Reichsmark in your bank account, or 100,000 Reichsmark in your bank account. That would end up to be nothing. It would be worthless. You know, it was something at one point in time, and then over the hyperinflation. In addition, the Germans are trying to overcome the Treaty of Versailles by doing secret deals with the Soviet Union. There's this thing called the Treaty of Rapallo with this new Bolshevik state. This ends World War I, and it normalizes relations between Weimar Germany and the Soviet Union. The secret part of this is that the Germans would provide military advisors to the Soviet army in exchange for space inside of the Soviet Union where the Germans could test weapons that they weren't allowed to have, like tanks and planes and stuff like that. In 1923, the German leadership is trying to be really friendly towards Britain and France, hoping that Britain and France will hate the Germans less, that they'll be nicer to the Germans, that they might change the Treaty of Versailles. Maybe they'll change the borders of Germany and give Germany more space or more territory from Poland. This works. That Dawes Plan happens, and so they're overcoming some of these problems. Around this period of time, too, everybody started to feel really kind of excited about never having another war again. And disarmament. Everybody disarming. There's a couple of treaties that get signed or agreements that get signed. And you don't have to write all of this down. But just write down the spirit of Locarno means no more wars. Peace for everyone forever. Treaty of Locarno is signed by the British and the French and the Belgians and the Germans, and they promise never to go to war against each other ever again. This is why there is no World War II. It's just a myth. And it also guarantees the borders of Western Europe between France and Belgium and Germany. In 1926, the Germans are allowed to join the League of Nations. But secretly, they're starting to violate the Treaty of Versailles with more weapons than they're supposed to have, or more soldiers. And once again, with the spirit of Locarno, in 1928, there is a Calabrian Pact where 65 nations agree that they'll never go to war again, that they're going to renounce war as a means of solving problems. Once again, there's never a World War II because people signed an agreement. But I'm going to skip the Young and the Dawes Plan and just go right to the Great Depression. Once again, the Young Plan and the Dawes Plan are about getting the German economy back on track by having American loans go to them. The loans, though, that the Americans are giving to the Germans dry up in 1929 because people can make a lot more money on the American stock market. All throughout 1929, the stock market is on fire. And people who are smart or dumb are throwing their money into it and just making a killing. Suddenly, there's a collapse of the American stock market when everybody realizes that the stocks are completely overvalued. Unemployment goes crazy in really around the industrialized world, but in Germany in particular. They go from an 8.5% unemployment to a 30% unemployment. 6 million German people unemployed. There's not really a very good social welfare state to replace their lost earnings. There's a little bit. But for the most part, a lot of people around the world, when the Great Depression happens, give up on capitalism and give up on democracy because they think that those things have failed. And as the Great Depression happens, this is when you get large numbers of people going far left and going far right to try to overcome their economic misery. Bourgeois liberal capitalism has failed. What are you going to replace it with? Communism or fascism? Essentially, the Great Depression kills the Weimar Republic. Tainted by the treaty, tainted by the hyperinflation, and nails in the coffin for the Great Depression. I can prove that to you. Don't do anything with this info, just look at it. Look at 1928 is before the Great Depression, 1930 and 32 during the Great Depression. Do you see what happens? What's the biggest movement that you see? Nazi Party. Where are they getting their support from, do you think? Who's losing out? That one on the bottom, by the way, is the German National People's Party, a nationalist. It's kind of a right-wing party. Can you see how those right-wing people would gravitate towards the more sexy, sorry to use that term, the more sexy right-wing nationalist party of the Nazis? Can you see, too, how about 15% of the people like communism? You know what those 15% are? Who loves communism? People are raising their hands in class. It's terrible. No. What kind of people love communism? Far left, and in particular, who's attracted by it?
Workers.
Workers. Yeah, and I'm going to tell you that I think about 15% is about all they're ever going to get. What's the population of the working class in Germany at this point in time? 25%. So they're getting some of those workers. There's a presidential election that happens. 3 guys run. One of them is Paul Hindenburg, the field marshal who ran Germany during World War I. One of them is this right-wing demagogue Hitler, and one of them is the left-wing demagogue, a guy by the name of Ernst Thälmann. And they have this election for president, and the center guy wins, slightly to the right. Not the far right, and certainly not the far left. It's Hindenburg who wins. I made it. Here's the summary for you before we jump into when we talk about real Nazism, the Nazis taking over. Did you get that we had a revolution in 1918 that wasn't very revolutionary? Well, it's revolutionary in the sense of going from an empire to a democracy. But that democracy doesn't really get going. It really can't be supported. It has too many things rocking it. The Treaty of Versailles taints it. Once again, the hyperinflation taints it. And the economic disaster of the Great Depression just kills it. In the beginning, left-wing and right-wing radicals were trying to topple it. They gave up doing that, kind of started to play along with the bourgeois democracy. But you can see that they're voting against each other in the bourgeois democracy. Just a matter of time until the Nazis are going to, in some way, get into power. And as the situation gets more dire, as it gets more desperate, people start to gravitate towards the far left, the communist people start to gravitate towards the far right, the Nazis. It's just a matter of time before something gives. And just like Eastern Europe, all of those autocratic states, Germany's going to fall away from democracy as well. Questions? Questions from home? Okay. Well, no questions, then you guys can go and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.